Well, it's 10 years this week. My goodness, I can hardly believe it. 23rd of July, since the untimely death of singer Amy Winehouse. Sadly, she never got to meet her musical hero. Now a comedian, she's written and performs I Miss Amy Winehouse. It's her first solo show about the absurdity of grief, celebrity, sticky nights out in Naughty's Camden, and what it means to truly miss someone you love but never met. Suchandrika, welcome to Times Radio. I'm presuming you never met. I just said it, but I think that's the case, isn't it? So tell me about your relationship with Amy, unrequited as it is.
Yeah, no, I didn't ever meet her. And I think partly what the show is about is that relationship we can have with celebrities sometimes where they can feel really accessible, even though Amy Winehouse was a massive global superstar and like broke records with her music and was hugely talented. But because we were the same age and because she sort of lived in Camden and was, photographed there a lot. I was working in Camden and going out there a lot back then. And it was a time when Camden was like very cool and they had all these late licenses and you could be up partying till hours I never see anymore because I'm tired. And it just felt like, oh, she's 3 drinks away, or like, oh, Amy will be in the next pub. And so there's a joke with my friends that, you could actually meet her. And the joke was if we met her, that I would befriend her, like we would be fast pals. I mean, in truth, of course, that's not how that happens. That's not a real thing. But it kind of came from that idea that we can feel close to people we've never met. And I think that was really reflected in the kind of the vigil that happened after she died outside her flat. There were just like crowds of people there for about a week or so because I was doing Vox Pops. I was meant to interview people, but it felt odd doing that because it felt like a festival and people kind of like drinking and sort of partying, but also mourning her. And that's always stayed with me how strange that felt. And obviously, there being 10 years, it's really come back.
Why was she such an important figure to you, particularly when you were younger? She had a whiff of tragedy and danger about her, didn't she, right from the start?
I think I remember hearing about her with Rehab, and that song itself is fairly
Yeah.
problematic.
Sums it up.
Yeah, it really does. It's got this really jolly melody, and you just want to dance as soon as you hear it. But at the same time, the words in it are so kind of prophetic and really sad. And I think with Back to Black in particular, what she did for me was she took this heartbreak she's experiencing kind of almost in real time with in particular one boyfriend, but with the guys she dated, and she made it into this music that even now, like during the pandemic, I was putting it on and just transported directly back to like 2006, which doesn't really happen with other music from that time. Like I couldn't tell you another artist I could put on in that way, and I just think, right, I'm back there. So it's really timeless music, and she could do that so quickly.
They're also incredibly autobiographical, her songs. So there is a sense, I suppose, that you might get from her that you might not get from another artist of intimacy that isn't necessarily correct, but is nevertheless very present.
Yeah, you definitely do. It's like a friend telling you things, and it's the kind of things that other 20-something girls were going through. It's just that she could then write a song about it and make it almost seem as though it was processed, as though she was okay with it. But it does seem, in the way that her life panned out, that maybe it takes its toll to be writing about yourself and your pain immediately, and then having people buy it and dance to it and ask you for it when they see you in the streets. It must have been very difficult to actually live that life. But I think back then, when I was that age, it just looked kind of amazing, and I just really admired her.
And how do you incorporate all of these feelings, this huge mixed bag of feelings, into a show?
Yeah, well, I think you can't. But what I had to do was I kind of started with those ideas and those themes, and it's about, I think, trying to take the audience on an emotional journey for that hour and trying to get them to feel some of those things and to get them to when I mentioned that bit about sort of trying to do those vox pops with Amy's mourners, it's about getting them to think, or maybe they didn't feel necessarily that way about Amy, although it is fans who usually come. But is there someone else in their life or another celebrity they felt that way about? How do they relate it to themselves? And I kind of contrast it with personal grief because also at that time, in my late teens, I'd faced a lot of family bereavement. And so for me, though, the contrast between the way you can feel very strongly for someone you know, but you could also feel very strongly for someone you didn't know. But those are probably different kinds of grief and probably different processes at work. So it's about not necessarily describing that, but trying to get the audience to feel it and understand what that was like.
You mentioned that, it's a lot of her fans that come to the show, but is there also a universality about it? So it's not just for Amy Winehouse fans?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the show is probably about grief and also about, those relationships to celebrities that we have um, and why we can feel close to people we don't know. And I think it all comes from the pandemic where, I mean, we don't know what the fallout will be in terms of communal grief and how we'll feel about everyone else's loss. We just don't know that yet. And I'm wondering what that will be like. And also, like during the pandemic, everything was flattened, like time in particular, but also celebrities were making kind of the Imagine video, but then everyone sort of panned it. It was as though celebrities were on our level, we were on their level, we were all using Zoom, we were all having the same sort of flat screen experience, and that just made me think of a time when things were more analog and I don't know, just wishing for a time when things were more normal, I suppose. So yeah, I think the pandemic kind of it very much came out that time.
You talk about time itself sort of flatlining. Maybe you could not flatline with this, but take us back to Camden in the early noughties. Was it the centre of your universe in that period? Did it feel like the centre of your universe? And did it feel? I mean, were you? Did it feel like the end of an era? Did it feel like the dying of something or the middle of something?
Yeah, I mean, during the noughties, I was out there all the time. So I was working for a news agency there, and then my friends were living in North London. It was very easy to like go for dinner, go to a bar, keep going. Like there's a place called Marathon Bar, which is still there. It's a kebab shop. But back in the day, it used to have a back room that was I don't know when it shut. Basically, I never stayed that long, and you just if you knew it, you knew it, and you would go there, and they play rockabilly music, and it would be lit by candlelight. And Amy was spotted there many times. But now there are licensing laws that came in 2011 that means you can't have those sorts of after hours secret parties, and so Camden and lots of areas in sort of central London don't have that same partying vibe. And some of us might say that's good, but for sort of 20 somethings, either they can't find that anymore these days or they don't want it because now we have the internet on our phones in our pockets. Maybe that's more interesting. So for me,
Do you think it's made a difference to the way young people socialise, or do you think you're just guessing that because you've got a bit older now?
I mean, you have guessed that I have aged, yes, but I
We
think
all do.
we all do. I mean, as you said when you introduced me, like 10 years just went by in a flash. But I think, I think a part of that partying is dating, is trying to find someone when you're in your 20s. And if a lot of that has moved online to apps, I think that has taken some of the motivation sometimes. And I think there are stats around younger people drinking much less, which is obviously a good thing because drinking was really at the centre of that culture. And I was definitely someone who partook in that. But if younger people aren't doing that as much now, then possibly it's for the better. But as you said, yes, I am usually tucked up in bed these days.
You mentioned reporting. I wondered when comedy became an element of what you wanted to do, and what made you want to pursue that.
Oh, yeah. So I think always, but I just didn't really know how to start or how to do it, I suppose. And I think it doesn't hurt if you kind of have a strong sense of yourself and the stories you want to tell about yourself. Um, and so I got to stage in sort of January 2020, and what I'd been doing up until then is hosting some podcasts and doing other bits. And so I did a course at a great place called the Bill Murray in Islington, and I've been doing it since then. So mostly through a pandemic.
So wait! You did a comedy course.
Yeah, a stand-up course. Yeah.
How
Um,
does that work? Tell me how a stand-up course works.
So I think I just didn't know how you start on the circuit or what you need to do or like what a set involves because I think when I've watched stand up, I assume they're just saying it off the top of their heads and they're really good improvisers. But actually, you sit down and you write something and you practice it and then you write it and practice it. So now that we're coming out of lockdown, there are lots of new material acts out on the London circuit in particular. So people are trying their material, seeing if their jokes land, and then sort of going home and editing it. So there's that kind of process which is quite invisible in stand-up that you learn about. And then you also get lots of time speaking in front of groups. The Bill Murray's got a really great sort of comedy club room, so you get to do a show at the end, and it's all dark, and it's like you're in New York in the '60s, and you get a video of it, so you can send that to promoters. So it kind of sets you up for that first stage, which no one really tells you about.
Well, this sounds like a really good idea, and your audience is just sort of fellow comedy students, is it?
Yeah, for that show at the end of the course, you can invite family and friends, and during the course, it's your fellow students. And then, I mean, just before that show, just for the end of the course, I went and did an open mic night on the Strand, and that was really helpful. Because sometimes you can feel that your classmates are going to laugh at you because they hopefully like you, but to have strangers laugh, you're like, okay, this is landing because they don't care how I feel, so it must be working.
Just finally, 10 years on, as we've said, from Amy's death, what do you think her legacy has been? I mean, the music is still, as you say, amazing.
Yeah, I think the reporting and the way we talk about mental health, and I think possibly the way we talk about women has hopefully changed. I mean, I think we all remember the kind of headlines that that were written about her back then, and like the kind of pictures and circle of shame type stuff, and we don't see the kind of journalism much anymore. And I think there'd be pushback on that kind of journalism on Twitter and so on. So I think part of her legacy is it is a sad story in many ways, but hopefully we've learnt from it. Hopefully we've learnt that if someone is looking unwell and unhappy, rather than let them carry on, maybe we should say something about it.
Suchandrika Chakrabarti, thank you so much for joining me on Times Radio. You can see I Miss Amy Winehouse this week on Friday the 23rd of July at the new Golden Goose Theatre in Camberwell, and then at the Etc. Theatre as part of the Camden Fringe from the 3rd to the 29th of August.